Will face the winner of today's three-way Republican primary in the U.S. Senate race this fall. And voters cast ballots in 3 congressional primaries. South Dakota incumbent Republican Governor Walter Miller faces one challenger. Democrats choose from 3 candidates in the gubernatorial primary. Also, voters choose candidates in the state's one at-large seat in the House.
It'll be an active day today as 8 states conduct primary elections. We'll be covering a lot of that if you stay with us on C-SPAN. James Bovard is the author of Lost Rights, The Destruction of American Liberty. Mr. Bovard, what rights are you talking about in this book?
Well, almost all the rights that the Bill of Rights intend to give the American people. The government has become so powerful and has become, the federal agencies have become so aggressive that people are losing their rights of freedom of speech. People have lost their right to own their property in hundreds of thousands of cases. The Congress is basically chipping away at the Second Amendment right to own guns. The citizens' right to due process has long since been shot to pieces by the growth of federal power. There are hundreds of ways in which the government is violating people's rights every day.
What prompted you to write this book?
Well, I've been doing articles for various papers for 10, 15 years on some of these subjects, and I felt it was necessary to tie a lot of the things together to try to make it clear to people that the problems with government policy was just not a problem with the IRS or a problem with the DEA or a problem with the FBI. Instead, it was throughout the federal government and throughout state and local governments that we've had this incredible growth of power, and the judges and the politicians have not really paid attention to it, and the news media has also done a very poor job of covering it.
Our guest, James Bovard, is the author of Lost Rights, The Destruction of American Liberty. He's with us for the next half hour, so we invite your participation. Please begin dialing now using the number on the bottom of your screen. Try to get in a fax or two. That number, 202-347-2111, for those of you with a fax machine, 347-2111. And the book is about, would you call this a constitutional book?
Well, I guess you could call it that. You know, it's sort of hard to think of a good label for it because it has so many different areas it goes into.
Well, let's pick a couple. Are you talking about local governments as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a section in there on zoning law that vivifies how much power local governments now have to dictate what a person can or cannot do on his own property.
For example?
Well, for instance, in the area around New York City, there are a lot of crackdowns because there are some people that have granny flats and allow their grandmothers to live with them once, you know, at a certain age. But a lot of governments have cracked down on that, saying it's a violation of zoning laws, and that people have no right to, people can have a 6-bedroom house and only be 2 people, but if they let some other person come in or carve out a little area of that, that's a violation of the zoning laws. It's amazing how much power the zoning officials have had to absolutely paralyze their property owners' rights and to turn it inside out, turn the principles inside out to what we had early in the history of this country.
Your publisher sent out a little note about how Cub Scouts were fined $76,000, something like that.
Yeah, the Postal Service has been very active in cracking down on people that have threatened to compete against the postal monopoly. The Postal Service has a monopoly in first-class mail, which is why the mail has gotten 20% slower in the last 25 years. And they've been very aggressive against people that challenge that. A few years ago in New York, a pack of Cub Scouts proposed to carry around Christmas cards and earn a little money at Christmas time, and the Postal Service threatened them with a fine of over $70,000. The Cub Scouts quit, naturally, but this is an example. I mean, people don't think of the Postal Service when it comes to arbitrary power or violating people's rights, but there are so many agencies right now with so much vague arbitrary power to slap these heavy fines on citizens. And in so many cases, an agency does not even have to go to court. The agency can sit down and write out a memo to itself and slap on a fine, and it's up to the citizen to have to try and prove the agency wrong in court.
What are you trying to rise people up to do something?
Would I do that? I'm a nice guy.
Well, this is written in a rather engaging,
certainly.
It's not a dull book. I'll put it that way.
Well, thank you. That's very generous.
What's the point?
Well, the point is to make people understand how much power the government has and how people are losing their freedoms. I mean, much of the trouble in this country, I believe, is that people have not really looked at the big picture of what government has done. People only focus on this or that or some small areas. But if you sit down and look at the power of the IRS and the FCC and the DEA and so many other federal agencies, one realizes that one has far less freedom and far fewer rights than one thought one had. And so I'm trying to educate people as far as how much power the government has, and hopefully from that there will be a backlash against the great growth of arbitrary power we've had in recent decades in this country.
St. Louis, Missouri, go ahead, please.
Yes, I want to talk about the Second Amendment with the right to bear arms. From my understanding, in all of my history classes in college, that you are allowed, well, they allowed Americans to bear arms for the simple reason that we didn't have a standing army. But now that we do have a standing army, it is no reason for citizens to have to bear arms. I live in the inner city, and the number of arms available to youth is outrageous. And we have to outlaw some guns.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Did you hear all that?
No,
okay. We'll try to fix that. Caller's calling about the Second Amendment.
Right.
And he, I guess, understands that you're not too thrilled with the way that the amendment is being interpreted. He says there's too many guns in the city. Young people are being killed. Why not restrain the ownership of guns?
Well, first of all, it's a constitutional right, and people forget that the war with the British in 1775 started when the British tried to grab the arms and rifles and cannons that the American citizens were storing in Concord and Lexington. It's very important to realize that there are 200 million guns out there at this point. There's no way government can go in and grab all the guns that might be used in crimes. The thing we need to do is change our criminal justice system. A major theme of this book is that this country has too many laws, not too few prisons. The thing we need to do is get rid of a lot of laws. We can focus our criminal justice system on people that use guns for robbing and killing and things like that, on violent crimes. That's the thing that the justice system needs to do. But the thing that happens with the government gun control laws is that they tend to be very selectively enforced, tend to be on poor people, on blacks, Hispanics, or on people that have unpopular views, such as David Koresh and the people down in Waco, Texas.
This is something from Newsweek about one of the issues you're interested in. The narcs should let the deadheads be. This is by you. What's it all about?
Well, this is an article on how the DEA has targeted fans of the Grateful Dead for drug busts. There have been thousands of people put in prison in recent years, and the thing that happens often at Grateful Dead concerts is that people will consume very small amounts of LSD, which is not healthy, but very rarely is it fatal either. So, but the thing the DEA has done has gone in and just basically brought in the buses and busted hundreds of people at these kind of concerts. And even though most of them are just not doing any harm to anybody else except perhaps themselves.
Enterprise, Alabama is next.
Hello.
Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
I'd like to ask the author, happy Libertarian greetings, by the way. I would like to ask the author if, through creeping socialism, that we might not already be at the point of socialist dictatorship in this country, to which it may not be irreversible.
All right, thanks.
Well, I think things are bad, but I think that there is a possibility for that people will understand how much power they've lost, how many rights they've lost, and how much... the thing that's fascinating is to see how the media misrepresents a lot of the problems we have in this country as far as taxes, for instance. Since 1982, I believe, the total tax revenue by governments has increased 50% faster than inflation. Right now, government spending is equal to 43% of the national income. According to the Gore Commission on Reinventing Government, the cost of government regulation adds another 9% to the citizens' cost to what the government controls in the society. That means that the government, through taxation regulation, is already controlling over half the resources in this country. So from that sense, one could call it socialist. However, there's still semblance of private property in many areas, and there is still there's a great potential for people for a backlash against the current regime.
Saraville, New Jersey. Go ahead, please. Saraville, you're on the air. Go ahead. Saraville, New Jersey? We'll try somebody else. How about Tuwallington, Oregon? Go ahead, please. Tuwallington, Oregon. Go ahead.
Hello.
You're on, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Bovard, first I want to congratulate you on your efforts. I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
And I agree with you that they are taking or attempting to take away all of our rights under the Constitution. And is there a possibility that we could form a class action against the federal government as it is today and get something done about it that way?
Well, I think it'd be hard to find many federal judges that would be willing to carry a suit against their employer. But as far as there have been a lot of legal suits filed by a number of organizations, conservative, libertarian, liberal organizations. ACLU's filed some good suits as well that have challenged government power. And these have stopped some of the worst abuses, at least on a temporary local basis. But certainly it's possible to get some achievement by lawsuits. But I think what we need fundamentally is a much greater public understanding of the arbitrary power the government now has.
The caller referred to they. Who is the they that you refer to in your book?
Well, I'm focusing on local, state, and federal governments and the power.
It's not just the federals.
No, right. I mean, there's a number of horror stories on their state governments and local governments, things like that.
What do you say about those who say, if you've got so many theys, they amount to being us?
Well, this is something which people have always tried to do, say that, well, you know, that it's not right to oppose the government since this is a democracy and government is you. Well, a person can walk through the downtown Washington and see these federal agencies and know that the federal agencies are not them. There is a fundamental difference between the people, the private citizens, by the society, and the government. The state is an artificial creation, which is necessary, but it's absurd to say that the people are the government.
Here's a fax from Fairfield, Connecticut. I just bought the book Lost Rights. Most people I talk to don't think we're losing rights. I do. How can I convince my mom?
Good question. Well, the thing to do, I've written this book, I've tried to write this book in a way that will give a lot of vibrant examples to people, that people can talk about the asset forfeiture laws. Under the asset forfeiture laws in the last 10 years, the governments at all levels have confiscated the property of over 200,000 Americans. And this is one of the most arbitrary programs because generally there is no need for any proof. You just have an assertion by a government official that the property was involved in wrongdoing, and the government claims title. It'd be difficult to conceive of a more arbitrary law. But the thing to do is basically to take some of the examples in the book, talk them up, and get people to realize, because there's a fog in front of most people's eyes as far as a clear conception of what government is all about.
This fax from McKee City, New Jersey. Aren't the drug laws prohibiting free use of certain drugs a violation of our constitutional rights?
Well, I'm not sure if I'd try to make it the constitutional argument on that, but it's true that the drug laws, almost all the drug laws, I think we'd be a lot better off if we got rid of them. Because so far the main achievement of the drug laws is to turn a lot of inner cities into war zones. Most of the violence, almost all the violence of the drug trade is a result of the drug laws and not the drugs themselves.
Arlington, Virginia, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. One question. What actions would you recommend a citizen take to reverse the recent trend of court-created rights? One case being abortion and the right to privacy, which an Oregon court, I think, just recently extended into a right to doctor-assisted suicide.
That's a difficult question. Something which I basically avoided in the book was the issue of abortion. Personally, I'm pro-choice. I understand if someone else is pro-life. I think that the Supreme Court decision on that in 1973 was real shaky as far as the rationale used. On the other hand, I hate to give politicians the power to control women's bodies. So I think lawsuits and, again, public education, public resistance can be effective in those areas.
You are, as your publicist describes you, a journalist and policy analyst who's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, Washington Post, New Republic, and others. You've also written a book called The Fair Trade Fraud and a book called The Farm Fiasco. You're from this area. How would you describe your politics?
Moderate. No, I'm joking. I'm basically oriented on individual rights and very skeptical, if not cynical, about government power. So it's amazing to see so many people that live in Washington and yet still have a blind faith in the federal government, or a faith in government in the abstract. People might distrust that politician or this politician, yet they still have this blind faith that government is going to serve them and is in their interest. And that's something which from the investigative work I've done, I almost never see that.
Mount Pleasant, Michigan. You're on the air.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Mr. Bovard. Hey, I'm a fellow libertarian myself. The caller that called earlier from the inner city who said he studied history, I don't know what history books he studied, but they aren't the same ones I studied. Here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. No free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. The strongest reason for the people to retain their right to keep and bear arms is a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny and government. Mr. Bovard, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's an excellent point, because people, most of the congressmen, many of the congressmen that criticize the Second Amendment right now or are in favor of confiscating guns, most of them are taking interpretation of the Second Amendment as if it was only for sporting purposes, to allow hunters to go out and shoot rabbits. But a fundamental purpose when the Founding Fathers wrote that amendment was that people would have the ability to fight back against government if the government became too abusive. And it's amazing to read the accounts in New York newspapers and others of what the police have done in those areas, especially in poor neighborhoods where they've just gone around smashing down doors and robbing people and just trampling people's rights and law left and right. Yet in the same city, the city council passed a law in 1991 that basically sent the police around confiscating people's rifles, knocking on doors and using registration lists created in 1967 at a time when the government promised they would never use those lists to confiscate the guns. Those lists are being used now to confiscate the guns. I mean, the fundamental point of lost rights, and the thing that we've forgotten in this country, is that government should not be trusted. I mean, government should be given a small amount of power to do the necessary things that any government has to do. But beyond that, it makes no sense to greatly increase the government's power.
Oakland, California is next. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
I am so happy to hear someone finally come forward and verse those opinions. We are really in trouble. How do you feel about how they pass bills like the crime bill, and they put underlying rules that they really don't disclose to the public, you know, that are included in those initiatives like that, and they get passed and just loads of rights are taken, and we're really not aware of those rights. And also, would you please comment globally and what they're getting ready to do to us in this GATT agreement in this World Trade Organization? You know, I don't understand what's wrong with our media. They're killing us. They will not give us the facts. Thank you.
As far as the crime bill, the Senate version was 845 pages. There are so many different levels of garbage in there. There are a few good proposals in there, but most of the stuff would simply would increase the government's power. There's a lot of proposals that would give the government more power to put people in prison. That's what we don't need. I mean, the thing we have to do in this country is get the nonviolent, victimless criminals out of prison. In 1990, for the first time, there were more people sent to prison for drug offenses than there were for violent crimes. The prisons are overcrowded. The thing we need to do is make more space for violent criminals and less space for nonviolent criminals. As far as the GATT agreement, there is a fair amount of garbage in that, but the idea, people don't realize how many trade barriers we have in this country. Our current trade barriers are costing American consumers about $70 billion per year. That's the equivalent of a hidden tax of $1,000 per American family. Most of the GATT agreement is good in that it will lower our tariffs, get rid of the 3,000 different import quotas we have on textile and apparel products, and move this country to a freer trade. So there are some bad parts. Overall, the GATT agreement's definitely a step in the right direction.
Mr. Bovard, two of our callers already have addressed you as if you were a libertarian, and you didn't disabuse them of that notion. That's why I asked you what your politics were.
Well, yeah, if someone had to put on a label, probably most accurate call me libertarian. That's a label I don't really pursue. You know, basically because there are some things which I might be closer to conservative on, and a few things I might be closer to liberal on. So I haven't seen a lot of profit in the label, but yeah, there's a lot of excellent ideas in the libertarian movement.
Austin, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Just fine, thanks.
First thing I want to do is compliment C-SPAN on the very fine job that you're doing, and please try to stay on the air wherever you possibly can.
We're trying.
The next thing I want to do is compliment the author this morning, who is your guest. I think that you have sounded the first wake-up call that I am aware of in this nation so far about what's happening to our rights and where are they going. The next thing I would like to do is to carry what he has a little step forward, in that I think our current alleged president is an entire socialist, that he is leading our country away from being a democratic republic. We are now a socialist nation, and the people do not understand what is happening. Please educate our people about what is happening. We are no longer a democracy. We are now a socialist nation, and please help continue to educate our people.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I think as far as the concept of a socialist nation, there are a lot of ways that the U.S. is socialist, a lot of ways we aren't. I've written quite a bit on some areas of government, like on agriculture policy, where there are a lot of pockets of basically socialized industry out there. And the important thing about socialism is it's almost always a tool to increase the politicians' control of the people. People look at socialism as far as the moral concepts and moral virtues, but what socialism always means is increased political power over the private citizens. That's why it should be resisted.
What has been the reaction so far to the book? It's been out a couple months.
Yeah, it came out in mid-April. Some positive reaction. I haven't, still waiting for some more book reviews, but it's a lot of very positive feedback. On a number of the talk shows I've done, I've been amazed at how it's hit the hot buttons, how people are so happy to hear of the book, and how they have a sense of enthusiasm on it. Because I think a lot of people suspect a lot of things I'm arguing in this book for a long time, and hopefully this book will help them understand it better.
Lost Rights, published by St. Martin's Press, Cleveland, Ohio. You're next.
Yes. People routinely forget the first part of the Second Amendment of the Constitution, and they only remember the last 9 words. The Second Amendment to the Constitution gives rights to states to form militia. And for this caller earlier that said that the Second Amendment will give you, will help you use your weapons to stand up against government is absurd to me. Do you think that your weapons are going to stand up against our federal military? I mean, come on, that's unbelievable. The Second Amendment that does not do that. The Second Amendment only gives rights to the state to form a militia. It does not give individuals the right to bear arms. I'm sorry.
I believe in the last 3 years, or last 4 years, there have been about 40 law journal articles on the question of whether the Second Amendment does give the right to the individual. And I believe 36 of the 40 have said that the amendment as written, as it was intend to give the individual the right. And as far as the question of whether people can stand up to the government, certainly if you're talking about standing up to the 81st Airborne, no one's going to be able to do that. On the other hand, the violations of rights and liberties are occurring mostly not from the military, but from the small groups of police or federal agents, like what we saw in Waco, Texas. I certainly don't mean to condone the lifestyles or the values of the people inside the Waco compound, but the federal reports on the incident there show that it was basically the federal government that attacked first. The federal government had no plan for a peaceful entry in Waco. They brought out almost 100 agents in heavy armor and with their guns out. It's amazing to see the public reaction to what happened in Waco, because in the final day there you had the federal government. The federal government used the gas on the people in Waco that the U.S. government had agreed not to use in international warfare, a chemical gas that was banned in international warfare, yet was used on American women, children, and men in that compound. That's an outrage, and I'm amazed that there was that the public was most of the public was so passive towards the government's a lot of the lies the government told on that, And even the federal reports themselves came out later and said that the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency had lied again and again and again about what they did in that attack.
Sacramento, California.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm so glad to see a book like this come out. I'm going to go out and buy it. I wasn't aware of it until I saw C-SPAN this morning, and thank you, C-SPAN, for what you do. You know, I'm 70 years old, and I've been telling young people for the last 25 years that they have not realized the freedoms that we're using, that we're losing, the lost rights that we have. They don't seem to stay aware. And then so many of the laws that we did need, that we did have, like the usury laws, they've abolished and put so many laws on there to control the people that if somebody could make a movie or something and show the way things were and the way things are and how they can become, which we've had some pretty good science fiction on that one, it might help. For God's sakes, keep up the good work. And don't you think we were better off before we had full-time legislators that have abrogated their own duties by giving all these agencies all the power over the people until you can't really get anything done?
All right, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, I think she's got a point. Some people say that the federal government got a lot more power. Some people say that the federal government got a lot more powerful once they figured out how to put in some indoor air conditioning in Washington in office buildings. So, but there's so many. Yeah, she makes a good point. So,
you have an article in here called "Dare Scare: Turning Children into Informants." What's that all about?
Well, the DARE program is a drug abuse program, and it was it has good intentions by and large. What's happened in many cases, though, is that the DARE programs, people that have gone to the children that have gone through the DARE training have turned in their parents for drug use or for drug possession. You've had a number of families that have been ruined by this. This was an article I did for the Washington Post in January this year. An interesting story there. It's an interesting story as far as how the Post edits. What happened was at the last minute, the people with the DARE organization protested the Post and protested about the critical article. And what the Post did in the last hours of editing is add 6 paragraphs from them without telling me. And one of the things that they added to the article was an allegation that one family that had been turned in for a small amount of drug possession, that the parents were actually drug traffickers. But the Washington Post had no evidence to that, and the DARE organization had no evidence for that. The Washington Post got sued for libel and settled for a substantial amount of money. And a lot of people were shocked at how the Post caved to this to the DARE organization on this. It's a story that a lot of people don't want to hear, though. So,
Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, next.
Good morning.
Morning.
I guess Brian wouldn't have wanted to be on this program, would he? He's a little stuffed for this guy. But anyway, hallelujah, there is a God, and his prophet is a balding, red-headed guy named Bovard. Number 2, assault weapons in America didn't become a problem until the People's Republic of China decided to dump $99 .30 caliber Kalashnikov rifles on this country and every other country in the world.
Well, it's not 30 caliber, it's 7.62, I think.
Yeah, that's 30 cal. 7.62 is 308.
Okay.
Number 2, it's not the 81st Airborne, it's the 82nd Airborne. And anyway, airborne is an oxymoron because everybody has a mother. And number 3, as an indication of the level of government abuse of rights in this country, how many times have you had to look over your shoulder since you wrote this book? And during writing this book, do you still look over your shoulder? Do you have a debugging device in your home, or do you feel your phone is tapped?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there are things that I try to keep an eye on. I mean, there